welcome to my talk on the hero's journey and why you really shouldn't use it. And just real quick before I get started, out of curiosity, everybody here, any of you write your own stories? Fanfic counts? All right, it's just better. That's what I thought. So one of the things that I always hear from people is that we have to follow the hero's journey because that's what makes for great stories, and they always want to cite all these great successful examples of that. And I don't think it works that way. And also, that's not how it was intended. We'll get that in a second. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Kevin Garcia. I have been a professional writer now for 25 years, and a teacher for 18 years, so I'm now officially as old as my students. Or teaching as long as my students are alive, rather. In that 25 years of being a professional writer, I worked for newspapers for the Associated Press, and for 10 years, I was with the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, so I got paid by Marvel, paid by Disney to read comics, so that's kind of fun. One of the things I did, for example, is Blue Marvel here, which is one of the many Marvel knockoff Superman, but he's a lot more than that. He's got a much deeper story. Kind of basically, that seemed like a good one to put up for this talk. Before we get started on describing the hero's journey and why I say people shouldn't use it, I wanted to tell you a story. It's an old story. This is the oldest story we still have a copy of, and that is the story of Gilgamesh. I imagine a lot of you have heard about, right? So, just a summary of it. Gilgamesh starts with a king who just does whatever he wants to do, and no one can tell him not to. He does this because he knows he's the strongest, and nobody's stronger than him anyway. He's a jerk, and the people know this. So they need help, and they call out for assistance, and where they find it is in a wild man in the forest. And the wild man is definitely powerful enough to fight the king, but has no desire to do anything useful. And so to convince the wild man to actually be useful, they find a woman. And she goes and, it's her job, Shamhat the priestess, to convince Enkidu, the wild man, to come to the city. And she does this by going to the river and bathing where we know he's nearby. And he sees her, looks at the deer, he's never seen an animal like that before. He goes to go ask her questions. She says, "Hi, I'm Shamhat." And then she proceeds to teach him about civilization. We'll say they fight. For 7 days and 7 nights straight. There's no breaks for food or drink or sleep. That's all they're doing for 7 days and 7 nights. Very exhausting afterwards. When it's done, Enkidu goes to the river and he goes to get a drink because he's thirsty. He sees his friends, the deer and stuff. He's like, "Hey guys, believe what just happened to me?" And they run off. And he's like, "What's going on? My animal friends don't talk to me anymore." And she's like, "You're a man now." So that happens. She's like, "Don't worry, I will show you where other men exist. Let's go to the city." So we go to the city, and he has another first in his life, alcohol. He gets invited to a wedding, because why not? And while at the wedding, he's getting very drunk. "Oh man, the lions won't talk to me anymore. They were my friends. I don't even understand what's going on." Now, when I said earlier that the king was a jerk, one of the many things he did is decide that whenever there was a wedding, he got first rights in the bride. And it was the law, so he would enforce that law regularly. So he shows up at the wedding, and drunk Enkidu here is like, "Hey, you should leave this couple alone. They were nice enough to bring me in and give me beer. I never had this before." And the king's like, "Whatever," pushes him aside. So Enkidu pushes him back through a wall. So king gets back up, pushes him back through a building, and they proceed to fight for, I'd like to say it's 7 days and 7 nights. I don't think the original poem doesn't specify, but I feel like it's good symmetry if you do that. So, however, these guys fight so much that one time Gilgamesh punches Enkidu so hard, creates a crater in the center of the ground. At the bottom of that is Enkidu struggling to get up. Gilgamesh jumps down there, reaches down and says, "Need a hand? You're a good fighter. We should hang out." And these two guys become the best of friends. And then after that, whenever Gilgamesh starts to be a jerk, Enkidu straightens him out a little bit to say, "You shouldn't do that." And whenever Enkidu wants to learn more about the world, Gilgamesh is like, "All right, I'll teach you." And I say all this because Dragon Ball, especially the early Dragon Ball, not Dragon Ball Z, you guys know is based on Journey to the West, right? Okay, but there is just so much overlap in storytelling that you can find similar stories over and over and over again, and that's where the hero's journey comes in. This is the bare bones of the hero's journey that most people think of when they hear that phrase. I think it's actually, I need to put my book out. It's one I had to pull up with my PowerPoint and stuff. But Joseph Campbell published several books on the topic. One of them was The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And that is one that many authors, many directors like to cite and say, oh, I read this book and that's why I'm basing it, blah, blah, blah. I don't think they did. For one thing, that hero's journey that's in the little diagram is not really in the book. In fact, usually people go through all these, like step 1, step 2, crossing the threshold, doing this, doing that. Those are chapters in the book, and they're not in order. Joseph Campbell was not traditionally educated. He was self-educated, and the book reads like it. Like literally, he just changes subjects halfway through every paragraph. It's neat. I find it like reading poetry almost, but it's not academic. It's interesting. But the key point of Joseph Campbell and all the other experts that talked about various versions of the hero's journey, and I got several here. Otto Rank, this is in order chronology of people before him. He wasn't the first one to talk about the hero's journey. Otto Rank, Vladimir Prout, Lord Raglan, Joseph Campbell, there's been many others since him. The key point of all of them was not, here is a ladder for you to start building your story on. It was, here is a lens through which you could look at other stories. None of these were ever intended to tell a story. They were all intended to read stories. And that was the whole point. With that in mind, I'd like to tell you another story. And I'm going to use this by color coding it. I don't expect you to remember all of their names, but just trust that whenever you see a different color, that is a different expert. Okay? So first off, we need to start with the birth of the hero. The hero must come from some kind of significant parents. Maybe they're from a faraway land, maybe they're the greatest of whatever they are in the world, maybe they're aliens from another planet. And you have the greatest scientist on that entire planet, the one who knows stuff that all the other scientists don't know, and it's a planet of scientists, all right? You can't really read it here because it's kind of blurry, but you have the distinguished parents. We have an interdiction. Something is coming up that needs to be addressed. Krypton is going to explode. There is, well, we already saw his alien part. And then the hero gets separated from his significant parents. The planet explodes. There is a prophecy that threatens the father, and that separates him from the hero, often him, not always, from the parents. There is a journey. This is why Superman's often called like a Moses story. They call it hiding the child away in the reeds. That's the way one of the experts puts it. He's spirited away. The baby's put into a water box, that kind of thing. And then the child needs raised. And in almost every version of the story, you have the child raised by somebody insignificant. Maybe animals, maybe peasants, maybe an elderly couple. It's always something like that. And this goes across different cultures. It's not always, I want to point out, there is not a story, there should not be a story, that hits every single one of these beats. What I'm doing is I'm picking specific beats that apply to this story. From this point on, you have the kindly couple that will take care of this child, teach him, humbleness. But then at some point, the child learns that they have a destiny. And here's where I want to specify right now that no one writing Superman's story went into it saying, I'm going to make it the hero's journey. The way oral tradition works is that as people tell stories, they keep the parts they like, and they get rid of the stuff that they didn't like, right? They may add new stuff as it goes down. And Superman's story was told over 85 years. Actually, almost 90 years now, so it's getting really close to being public domain. Superman's story was told over decades by dozens and dozens and dozens of writers, dozens of artists, directors, actors, screenwriters. The idea that Clark didn't know about his past until he was a teenager didn't show up till the movie, right? The idea that his dad might have died and he couldn't do anything about it, that was in the movie, right? But it was part that added to this story. If in the current comics, and actually I don't think any version of the comics, except for some of the ones written by Grant Morrison, his dad's alive. And in the old comics, both of his parents died because they went on a tropical cruise and got a rare exotic disease after finding buried treasure, because it was the 50s. But yeah, this is now what most people think of when they think of Superman's origin, even though it's not the comics, because through oral tradition and through the hero's journey, we just basically decided as a culture, this is what we think his origin is. As we continue, he gets a mentor he is given a call that he may reject, and there may be consequences of that rejection. I do think it's interesting that the holographic father is from the movie, but prior to that, there was a comic in the 50s in which Superboy had a robot teacher from Krypton that was programmed by Jor-El. So same basic thing, just a different, and I don't think Richard Donner was aware of that when he did that in the movie. But like, it's just an element that makes sense for his story, that somebody from his past would be teaching him about it. It's also a very weird story. The robot teacher programs one of Clark's classmates to be the perfect girl for him. They fall in love, and that's Clark's first time. But then afterwards, the robot teacher erases all of that from her memory, so she doesn't remember any of that happening. Yeah, that's got issues. It was the 50s. They were thinking about it. And when I say they, I mean male writers and artists. So yeah. But as we move forward, we have the hero becoming into their own. And they kind of cross that threshold. They go off into a search for adventure. And they have to face many trials. They have to fight the dragon, as some people put it. There's often a brother battle, which I don't think I have the no, I don't. I don't have the panel for it up here, but for the brother battle, several versions of Superman's story have had Lex Luthor know him since childhood. The 1950 Superboy version did that, Smallville did that, and they have a connection that makes them almost like brothers, and eventually they must come to a conflict. There is a point in the story where it says the hero, it's some versions of the story, the hero marries the daughter of his predecessor. And Lois's parents were originally not mentioned. And then later on they said, oh, she's actually from Smallville, because everybody is. And then later on they said her parents were ranchers. And then later on in the 80s they said, no, her dad was a general. And that's been the one that stuck ever since. And if you think about it, once you have a Superman, you don't need an army. So literally, she is the daughter of his predecessor. She's also in some versions seen as a temptress. And in many, in the hero's journey, not Lois. But to that end, so many of the 50s and 60s stories were all about Lois trying to like prove that you're really Clark Kent. I must prove it, you know. So she kind of filled that role in her own way, even though again it was not intentional. And now this brings us to where most American comics are, which makes American comics different from most Japanese and Korean comics in that those tend to have endings, whereas American comics get the status quo. But rather than calling it status quo, I prefer to use the term that Campbell uses, apotheosis. This is the point at which the hero becomes a god. And this is their apex of their story. This is the zenith. This is where most American comics just plateau and stay forever. But that's where What If comes in. We have What Ifs, we have Elseworlds, we have all these other things, so we can actually finish the hero's journey with Superman. They say that in many versions of the story, after they've achieved the thing they needed to achieve, they kind of retire into obscurity. They try to pass laws, but those laws are not listened to. People kind of forget the significance of the hero, and they try to replace it with new heroes that are not as good. The hero dies, but is not actually buried. They build a monument to the hero. There is a holy sepulcher dedicated to the hero, but the hero's body is not actually there. And the hero goes on a journey into the underworld and has to fight for resurrection and rebirth. And this is a very weird comic from the 90s. But at the end of those stories, the hero is sometimes given a choice, where he is the master of both worlds, where he does not have to be a hero. He could choose. You can be a hero, or you can be a normal person. You can go to that magical world, or you can be in that normal world. And in Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, Superman's been dead for over a decade. And at the end of it, we find out that Lois's husband looks an awful lot like Superman with a mustache, and that their baby can crush coal into diamonds. But the thing is, I cannot stress enough, Superman was not designed to be the hero's journey. This is how he was originally designed. He was a madman who was a genius that could take over the world. This is Siegel and Shuster's first drawing of Superman for their high school newspaper. They were going to do that little story there of who the Superman was. And this is true for a bunch of characters. This is the first version of Chewbacca. Very different. Wreck-It Ralph went through a lot of different changes over the years. This was almost the Enterprise in the 80s when they were going to bring back the, Star Trek for the movie, motion picture and everything. They almost did this. And actually, as I'm talking about Star Trek, I want to explain why I say that the hero's journey is not meant to be used purposefully as a storytelling tool. So if you think about movies that you've seen, that you know, those are very well known for following the hero's journey. The directors even said it out loud. You're probably thinking of these movies, right? You got Star Wars, you've got The Matrix, you've got the Superman movie that I already mentioned earlier. All these movies very, very closely follow the hero's journey. But I want to say something that's controversial. I kind of want to credit the producers, not the directors. And I don't mean that to say that the producers are smart, because they're not. I'm saying that because all three of these movies were thoroughly messed with. Either because budgets were cut, or editing was done after the director was done, or because they literally fired the director halfway through the movie and brought in somebody else. All right? So all of these movies were very successful, but were not the way the original creators intended. Even though they said later that it totally was. When you give the directors who say, I am going to make a hero's journey movie, carte blanche to do that, you end up with these movies. They're not good. All right? The second Matrix movie, not a good movie. All right? Man of Steel, second worst Superman movie I've ever seen. The worst is Superman Returns, but that's a whole other discussion of why that is. This movie has John Kent as a bad person. I'm okay with that. Superman Returns has Superman as a bad person. I'm not okay with that. Anyway, and then we got, I used to have the prequels up here, but I replaced it with The Rise of Skywalker because, but the point is, these weren't good movies, and they were given carte blanche to follow the hero's journey. And the point is, that's not how it's supposed to be. And I'll give you one more very specific example with details. The 2008 Star Trek movie. I liked it. It was a fun movie. It really was. But the issue I have with it is that it was very clearly intended to be, I'm going to make Captain Kirk the main character of the hero's journey. Like, very, very intended to be. We have a significant birth. He's born as the whole of the universe is changing in a new timeline, and his parents die, and then he's raised by other people out in the desert of Iowa. And then he gets a mentor, but he rejects that, and he doesn't want to go. But eventually, he gets a new mentor that gives him a prophecy of what is meant to come. And then he finds a brother, but they struggle in a brother battle. And eventually, he overcomes all this and reaches apotheosis. And again, it was a fun movie, but like none of that was necessary. Because Star Trek already had somebody who followed the hero's journey. Spock. Spock had all of the elements. He had a significant birth. He was supposed to be the first, although retroactively there's others, but he was supposed to be the first, half Vulcan, half human. And he was seen as being unique and also strange. He was rejected by his father at birth, who then became a big deal later. He had a troubled childhood in that he had a harder grasp over his emotions than his Vulcan classmates. He had a mentor who was magical and special, who was himself the time traveler, which is great and is canon. And there was literally a road of trials that he had to go through. The mentor said, you must go on this road of trials, and he went to go on those road of trials by himself. He eventually gets the call to adventure when he joins Starfleet against his parents' wishes, and finds a brother in Captain Kirk, who he fights. You know? And then, as any great hero, he dies at a place of significance, and is not buried. He's released into space. But there's a resurrection. And eventually, he becomes the master of two worlds. He creates laws that people don't listen to. He tries to create, in the storyline, tries to make a reform Romulus, and it doesn't really work. And then at the end of it, he has a choice. He can have his adventures, or he can retire. He fully fills the hero's journey. So the reason I say all this is this. If you are working on your story, it's perfectly fine to be familiar with the hero's journey. But if you're trying to just make the hero hit all of those marks, well, first off, no story should do that. But second, the whole point of the hero's journey was to have it flow naturally, to have it just come as the stories develop. And again, hero's journeys are meant to apply to things like fairy tales and folk tales and legends, things that were oral tradition, things that had numerous creators adding to over the years, not things that had a single creator, you know? And that was the purpose of those things. When Joseph Campbell was still alive and he was asked about Star Wars, he said, yeah, it's fine. I liked it. But it wasn't intended, like he didn't say this, so I'm adding this, that he didn't intend his thing to be used as a guide of how to write, you know? Now, there's other people that have created other ones since. So there's famously the Story Circle. That one is intended to be a guide of how to write. But it's basically the same thing, except missing the key point, which was this is how to read. All right, so that's what I was going to say. I'm going to add one more little bit here in that I'm writing a story. I've got a Kickstarter that just launched on Valentine's Day where I'm writing a story using public domain heroes that I've reinvented to tell a new story about the Golden Age. And I'm trying to shoehorn Hero's Journey in the description there discussed. And I've got stickers from that because I accidentally printed them too small. So if you want a sticker from this, I don't know numbers. I've been a teacher for years, but I teach English and journalism. I don't teach math. Everybody's like, well, duh, it's 3 inches. I don't know what that looks like. Could have just pulled out a ruler, but I didn't. Anyway, I've also already written a book about a young 18-year-old happy-go-lucky girl who always believes the best in people. She's basically this world girl, Latina. And I decided, I got hired to write her, and I said, cool, can I have her fight a superpowered serial killer? Basically, see each other. So that's going to go well. The story's already written and drawn, but it's not going to be published till next October, so that's kind of neat. But anyway, that's pretty much everything I was going to talk about. I do, however, have time for questions, or thoughts, or disagreements. Again, I don't mind if you have a different opinion than me. If you're like, no, a hero's journey is a great tool to write with, that's fine too. What you got?
What do you think of the story train idea introduced by Rick and Morty?
Yeah, so the story train Rick and Morty, which is literally just the story circle that Dan Harmon came up with, is the same thing. I do think because that was originally intended specifically for episodic TV series, it makes a lot of sense. Because, especially if you're like, everybody was like, oh, The Simpsons used to be great, Simpsons used to be great. You go back to like the first season, they didn't know what they were doing. You know, they were figuring it out. And if they had a guide for what you should do in every episode, so there's an illusion of change, but there's still the status quo, it might have been a little bit stronger. So I do think it makes sense for that purpose. But I don't think the story circle works if you're writing a novel. You know, or like a manga, you're going to do 13 volumes. Okay, cool. Probably shouldn't use the story circle. In fact, what I tell people to do is focus more on mainly the overall story. And then second, what are those markers? Like, think of like each chapter ending in a cliffhanger. It doesn't have to be like a life or death cliffhanger, but if that's something that makes me want to come back to the next chapter. That works really well. But for a TV series like, you know, Simpsons, Rick and Morty, those things, where there has to be some semblance of the status quo, even if there's an ongoing story, it makes sense. Yeah, I get it there, but that was built for that purpose. Any questions? What you got?
So, as an up and coming writer myself, would you say that you could use the hero's journey, but not like strictly follow it, like use it as like to structure a story, but not exactly like?
So here's how I would use it. If you look up like Joseph Campbell archetypes or hero's journey archetypes, what I think is hilarious is I'll sometimes see like the 7 archetypes or the 12 archetypes, or there was no number of archetypes. Literally, again, he was not academically trained. He made up a different number every time he wrote the book, okay? But the point of that is you can take any section of the hero's journey and say, all right, I want to talk about a hero who resists the call, but then has to be forced into it. All right, cool. That's been done 1,000 times, yes, but how you do it's going to be different. You know what I mean? Or I want to look at the chapter title that Joseph Campbell chose is Into the Belly of the Whale, but the chapter is nothing about that. It's like one reference to Jonah at one point. But if you want to have where he's going into like they've already been a hero to an extent, but now is the serious trial where all of the big villains show up. That's a great story too. If you want to look at the archetypal, in fact, in this story here, I specifically chose my characters. I picked characters from the public domain because it's kind of a comic book about comic book history, and I wanted characters that had a history, so if you like the comics, you can read their original stories for free online. This is public domain. But also, because I wanted characters that were familiar to everybody, even those who don't read comics. So like, I have a guy covered in the flag. You know who he is, right? I have a guy who's really strong and doesn't wear a shirt. You know who that is, right? I have a woman who is a goddess. Get the idea? So they're all fitting those archetypes. They're all like, even if you barely know superhero movies or comics, you know who those characters are. And that was the point. I picked them specifically to just fit what would be familiar to a audience because nobody's read this book before, so make it easy to read. Okay. So my suggestion then, look for the archetypes or section of the story. What's up?
I was wondering, do you have a good example of a story that doesn't follow it?
That does not follow it? Well, okay, so I'm going to go two different routes. One, a story that does, and one story that doesn't. Aragon is a story that does. But when it was written, he was 16. So, like, that makes sense. And the fact that a 16-year-old did a book that was so popular that it became a bestseller, power to him, you know? Yes, he used the hero's journey. People are like, oh, he's just ripping off Star Wars or King Arthur, because he was using the hero's journey, you know? But it's okay, he was 16. And I'm not saying adults can do that too. But my point is, I'm not saying it can never happen. I don't think his story is very original. I don't think it's that exciting. But I get why it works and why people like it. Now, for one that doesn't, my favorite book series of all time is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm going to be giving a talk on Sunday about anti-heroes. And the main character of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is an anti-hero. And I will explain what that means on Sunday, but just a quick summary of it right now. Anti-hero doesn't mean a hero that kills people. Anti-hero means a hero that doesn't do what a hero is supposed to do. And literally, Arthur Dent's whole goal of that entire series is, I want to rest and drink a cup of hot tea. That's his only goal in the entire book series. And so that book, its series, is basically an anti-hero's journey. There's still tons of adventure that happens, and weirdness, and comedy, and oddly romance, even though the author flat out admits he's bad at it. He is. But it is step after step. Like a mentor shows up in book 2, and literally says, "You're all losers. I'm leaving." Like he's like, "Oh, good, an ancient ghost that knows all the secrets. I do. I'm not telling them to you guys." And then he just takes off. Like that's literally what happens, you know. So that book is entirely anti-hero's journey. Now, the writer didn't really intend it that way. Literally, he was writing it chapter by chapter. The only reason that the ship can go to improbability drive is because he wrote them into a corner and didn't figure out how he was going to get out. So he's like, what if there's a ship that can do anything? Yeah, that's it. So, but the end result was an anti-hero's journey story. So I love that. And TV series, to an extent, movie. Yeah. Any questions?
What do you think of Ian Coulter's?
What?
What do you think of Ian Coulter's sequel to Hitchhiker's Guide?
What do I think of the more recent one? Okay, so fandom question. So I am such a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I have every version of it ever made. British versions, US versions, I have the cassettes that were recorded by the author reading his own books. I have the scripts to the TV show, I have the scripts to the radio show, all of those things. So, in fact, I was a reporter 25 years ago, and I got hold of Douglas Adams' agent's number. And I was like, oh, I want to do this interview, but I have to think of good reasons to do the interview. And I was really struggling. And I put it off, and then he suddenly died. Yeah, that happens. But then the book came out, or the sequel, the new sequel, rather, that was commissioned by his widow. And it sat on my shelf for like 3 years. I could not read it. Finally, I read it, and I hated it. Because the author said, look, I'm not trying to ape his style. I'm going to make my own style in that universe. Fine, cool with that. But he didn't actually read the whole books. Like he describes the Vogons as only using atomic weapons because they love how they explode, when literally every other time it says they have ray guns. Like it says that in the book, you know? That kind of stuff, it bothered me for constantly, like when I worked at Marvel, my whole job was continuity, you know? But then Douglas Adams' friends recorded the radio version of that book. And they basically fixed the little minor problems. And I realized that the story underneath those minor problems was a good story. And I liked it. So now I can go and appreciate the book too. It just took me a couple reads to actually appreciate that book. If you're going to be following a giant series, they have 5 books. If you're going to be following a series that had 5 books, read the 5 books, you know. Yeah. But yeah, actually, I'm not British, but if they ever asked me to, I'd read it. That series. Yeah, fun fandom questions are always fun. What's up?
You referred to in a slide a water box that the hero would be rescued in?
Yes.
I don't know what that means. Could it be something like the basket that
That is
Moses
literally,
was
that's literally what that means. When they say a water box, they literally mean the basket for Moses. So, in fact, Zack Snyder really seemed to think, Zack Snyder, that's the director's name? Because there's a writer named Snyder in the comics, and there's the director named Snyder. And I was
Scott Snyder's her thing.
Thank you, Scott Snyder's in the comics.
Great guy.
Yes, he is a great guy. Zack Snyder, I don't like any of his movies. I've heard he's personally okay. I just don't like any of his movies. Literally, he opens his remake of Dawn of the Dead by showing all the horrible things in the world, and one of his examples is just Muslims praying. And I'm like, just praying. And then later on, he has somebody die and they don't become a zombie because they weren't bitten. And I'm like, have you not watched a single George Romero movie? You're literally making a George Romero movie. Anyway, sorry, sidetrack. But the point I was making is, he seems to think that Superman's a Christ figure. And that's viable. I mean, as oral tradition and the story can change over time, it makes sense. But while I don't think the original creators who were Jewish saw it that way, it is, I think, much easier to see Superman as a Moses figure, or what's become more recent in interpretations, as a symbol of immigration. Because he literally was born somewhere else and snuck here, you know? So it's actually, it's pretty interesting. In fact, by the way, sidetrack, and I know it's off from your question entirely. When they redid Superman's origin in 1986, John Byrne wanted to fix that. He was going to have not the baby arrive in the ship, but the mom arrive, give birth, and die, just so he could be an American. The editors were like, no, you can't do that. So instead, what he did is he called the ship a birthing matrix. So he's technically birthed by the ship when he lands. But yeah, they've not done that since. So no, he's now officially born a Kryptonian. But that's interesting. In the 80s, like, no, we want him to be an American. But yeah, so yes, this is literally the water box. A lot of times they will use terminology that is familiar from very specific, well-known things. So like the water box for Moses, or he says not into the belly of the whale. He's referring to Jonah, not Pinocchio, which a lot of people think of. Which I don't know why he compares that to Jonah, because Jonah doesn't fight a bunch of monsters in there, does he? I don't remember that in the story. But that's the comparison he uses. I do tell everybody that two things that every single piece of fiction is going to, at least European and American made, is going to reference is the Bible or Shakespeare. Everything. A Transformers movie is going to reference one of those two. Like, they will be referenced, even if the writers didn't realize they're referencing it. It will happen. Other questions? I think you almost had one.
I don't heard it. I still can't talk.
Well, tell him what you're thinking. He'll word it better.
No, I don't know. I will try. Okay, so I was thinking about Save the Cat.
Oh,
Because I hear about Save the Cat a lot. So yes, I just heard like what you thought of Save the Cat, and if so I don't know how to word it because I think a lot of people, like I said, like deviating and I'm trying to ask.
I think I know what you're trying to ask. Basically talking about the save the cat moment that establishes the hero as the hero. Understand?
Or just all of it. It's kind of split up. It's like bamboo. It's like
Various steps for the hero?
yeah, well yeah, and it's like yeah, it's like I'm too agree. It's just like I guess things like that. Things like I don't know. I just wonder if it's so like do this and I want to say like deviating from his spine. It's also like scared. I don't know how to like.
So this kind of ties to what I was saying earlier about using archetypes and using parts of the hero's journey. So that save the cat phrase, I don't remember who said it. It was a movie producer from Hollywood that basically, like it had been done in stories forever, but he was the first one that kind of codified it by describing it as the save the cat moment. And what he was saying is that there were certain points that a hero must take if he's going to be the hero of your story, depending on the story you're doing. But just like I said earlier, where there's not a single story that follows every single point of every single one of the what is it? Let me go back to the thing here so I can hang around over for a second, and then I'll get to your question in a second. Okay. Raglan, I think. No, Prop. Prop has like 112 points to the hero's story. And I've often heard people say that Joseph Campbell has 11 points, or I've heard them say 7 points. He never numbered them. He never numbered them, right? And the point is that you don't need to hit all those things. But deviating also works. Where the deviating comes is that you could take something that you just know is associated with hero stories and flip it on its head. Or just do it wrong, you know? Again, I'm going to be talking about anti-heroes on Sunday, and Deadpool's a great example of that, you know? But the save the cat moment is where the hero does something so obviously good that you can't help but know that this is the hero. And for Superman, it's literally usually a cat. There's often a scene, whether it's a cartoon or the movies, where he will save a cat and give you the cat. Like it almost like not every movie, but every like starting of the movie. Somewhere they'll do it, except for Zack Snyder's. He was depressed the entire time. I swear, Batman v Superman, as far as I'm concerned, is Superman pretending to be Batman and the Punisher cosplaying as Batman. Anyway, but the point is that you can do that. But with Deadpool, they will often make fun of that. Where they'll be like, look, Deadpool, children. He'll be like, you're right. Hold a gun up to their head. Do what I'm saying or I'll shoot a kid. And the bad guy will be like, you're gonna what? So he technically saved the day, but by threatening the cat. You know? So there's nothing wrong with doing that depending on your character. Or in Arthur Dent's case, oh, the cat's in trouble. I hope somebody saves it. Which is interesting because Arthur Dent does actually become very heroic in some of the books. Literally in book 3, he challenges Thor to a fist fight, like the god Thor. And he says, why don't we take this outside and we'll fight each other? And Thor's like, I will! Of course, outside, they were on a flying vessel, so when Thor walked outside, he just fell. Arthur's like, okay, let's get out of here. So yeah, you can deviate from those moments, you should deviate from those moments, but being aware of them is helpful. That doesn't mean you have to include either the real one or the movie. None of these things are required, and that's the whole point, is that you can. It makes sense to have a save the cat moment. Part of why, for the story that I'm working on, I picked characters that look familiar to people, even if they're technically original characters, is because I didn't want to have to do that save the cat moment. I want you to look at that character and be like, oh, that's Captain America. I know what he's going to do. And we find that and move forward, you know. I don't need to establish, you know, that the character that talks in fake Shakespearean is basically Thor or Wonder Woman, you know, like it's pretty straightforward. Those little signifiers are pretty easy. But yeah, you don't have to use them. You can use them. You can deviate from them. You can just ignore them and move on. Other questions? Was that close to your question?
So, yes, sorry. My brain doesn't anymore.
Oh, mine never does. I'm running on autopilot. This is not actually me knowing anything.
You got 2 more days too, so.
Well, you know what's really crazy is today I'm in San Marcos talking to you guys. And I will be doing it again tonight at 8 p.m. I think for Drunken Gods. Tomorrow I'll be in Round Rock talking about public domain to kids. And then Sunday I'll be back here talking about anti-heroes. A few months back I did Austin, Dallas, Austin in one weekend. I chose to do that. I like driving, so it's okay.
Even so, will you ever choose to do that again?
You know, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It really wasn't. You know, one trip was finding a place to stay because I'm a teacher, which also for that. Found a friend with a couch and I said, yes. We live an hour away from the convention center. I don't care. Any questions?
Just so you know,
Sure.
why did you decide, like, what made you decide that you wanted to become, like, do these sort of talks?
Well, I like talking. No, about 15 years ago, I was giving some talks to teachers, and I realized I could accomplish stuff. So I went to a comic convention. Can I give a talk here? I'm like, yeah. So I gave a talk there. Started enjoying it, and then this was a up-and-coming convention in South Texas. They had some celebrities, and they didn't have any hosts for the celebrities. So I remember specifically Vernon Troyer, the mini actor, was on there, and he was like, hello, anybody have any questions? Like, he didn't know what to do without a host. So I literally went to the guy running it, and I was like, hey, from now on, when you have a celebrity, I'll be your MC. Just have me do that. So now I host celebrity talks at a lot of different conventions around Texas. Not always needed. Some, like, for example, I can't remember his name right now, the guy that does Vader Zim and Angry Beavers and stuff. He does not need a host. Yeah, not the creator, the voice actor.
Oh, Richard Horvitz?
Yes, he does not need a host. He just talks, you know. So I just go walk around with a microphone. But if they need a host, then I'm there. So for the past 15 years, I've either been hosting those things or giving these talks. And for the past 2 years, I've been on TikTok doing this. which is funny to people that know me because I suck at technology, all of it. I rarely ever post on Instagram. I don't use Twitter, but somehow TikTok has been the one that I post on almost daily. So, Kevin Garcia _ found. Free to follow. And it's mostly me talking about comic history and stuff. Or every once in a while, I'm showing interviews. Does that answer the question? Usually somebody asks a question about Marvel, like, how'd you get a Marvel job? Or what do you do? Or who's your favorite? Like, but I'm an anime convention. You guys don't care. You can care.
I mean, there's always a lot of Marvel people and
Yes.
DC people at this convention.
Well, I'm exaggerating. It's not like there's no anime fans at the I can't call it a non-anime convention. It's called a traditional comic convention.
I always just call them conventions. Like,
Yeah.
you know, don't like. It was not like anime specific. I just like comic convention or something for myself.
I do appreciate when a convention has something specific, like an anime convention, or in this case, anime convention people like something older, because then you have a focus for what you're going to be doing. Another one I like is Staple, where it's just all about indie art. So I like when there's like that. That's why I really want to come back to Ushicon. I came here just before the pandemic, I think, 2019, I think. And I heard they're doing it again. I want to try, so excited to be here. Okay. Why do they have a cow as their logo?
Because it's cow.
Okay, see?
She's a little cow.
I didn't know that. Keep the fact that like cat women I kind of get, but like cow women.
She always has different outfits.
But she's always.
But always a cow. Fair enough.
It's very intense.
Yeah, cow because Texas.
Because of Texas,
Literally a cowgirl.
See, there you go. Right in front of my face the whole time. Okay. All right, anything else?
Okay. Just out of curiosity, if you're familiar with the term plotters versus pantsers, and if you have a preference on
Say
what
pacers?
plotters versus pantsers.
Actually, I'm not. Can you tell me?
So I don't remember who I was reading who wrote about this, but it's basically two different writing methodologies. One where you outline your whole story start to end and fill in based on your outline, or like with Hitchhiker's Guide, you just write it chapter by chapter, wherever it goes, it goes.
See, I do know what you're talking about. I just hadn't heard those terms, I guess, or maybe I have forgot about them. Speaking for myself, I am somewhere in the middle. Like I have to know where it's going, which is why like I'll draw those. Like I'm not an artist really, but I'll draw the characters so I know what they look like, and I have to know where the end points are, and then I'll kind of get there and build it up as it goes. I just did a children's novel I wrote 2 years ago, which is going to be published soon. They told me this spring, maybe. But it's about luchadors, let me rephrase that, teenage luchadors, so like 13-year-old luchadors, fighting Mexican folklore monsters. And it was a lot of fun doing that. So basically, they just had the IP. They're like, we have the rights to these wrestlers, make them a story. I'm like, okay. So it's a chapter book aimed at like, say 6th to 9th graders, you know, and it's a lot of fun. But in plotting it, I found I did somewhere in the middle. So I did have to have like, I knew I wanted to have a point here, and a point here, and then how I'd get there would kind of develop as I was going. And then if something came up, I'm like, wait, this is too good. I need to go back and add a little reference to it here. So when it comes up, I'm like, oh, that's what that was. Totally planned that on purpose. But that was a lot of fun. That one's going to be about the wrestler named Dragon Lady, for the record. Should come out soon. We're waiting on the art and the translation. It's going to come out in English and Spanish at the same time. They asked me if I could translate it to come out. I speak Spanish like Tarzan speaks English. And I mean that movie Tarzan, for anybody who's going to be specific about that, because I've read the books. He does. But anybody know that Tarzan's first spoken human language is French? So just think every time Tarzan talks, he's going to have a French accent. Any other questions? Well, tonight at, I think 8 p.m., I'll double check the clock. I think tonight at 8 p.m., I'm going to be talking about drunk gods. I'm specifically going to be looking at gods from different cultures who are gods of alcohol and drunkenness and how that affects both their personalities and their followers. And specifically, we want to have spoilers for what we're going to talk about, Greek gods, Greco-Roman, and Mesoamerican, what most people call Aztec or Maya, and the Norse. all good groups adjourn. Double check the time on that one. It is indeed 8 o'clock in this same room. Thank you guys for coming.